Novelist K.K. Daruwala ji in the chair here. I'll request Professor R.K. Dhawan to kindly chair the session. And I'll request now Dr. Rashmi Bajaj to kindly anchor the session as MOC. Iska.
A very good morning to all of you. First of all, my congratulations to Professor Batra for organizing this wonderful conference and also having given me the opportunity of standing here, and that too, introducing you all to the session of none else than K.K. Daruwala ji. It is a real honor and privilege for myself to take this august audience into the word and word space of the renowned poet and novelist K.K. Daruwala. The scenario of Indian English literature will indeed be unimaginable without the thematic variety, profundity, and stylistic craftsmanship of K.K. Da, as he is called, K.K. Da. He is a living legend today with a writing career spanning over almost 4 decades, influencing many generations, not only of writers, but also of readers. His creative corpus from 1970, Under Orion, his first book of poetry, to 2018, Swerving to Solitude, Letters to Mama. It includes 11 books of poetry, 3 novels, and 5 short story collections. His poems have been translated into many languages and appeared in many acclaimed international anthologies. K.K. Da has been a recipient of many coveted awards: Commonwealth Poetry Award, Commonwealth Prize for Fiction, Sahitya Academy Award, and the highest Indian Literary Award, as we call that, Padma Shri. He was also a member of the award Wapsi Brigade, if we call it brigade, but that is another thing. His own views are about that. Maybe he would like to share in today's lecture also. So, this poetry wala, my friends, also holds the distinction to be a police wala. Yes, he has been an IPS officer, a cabinet secretary, who retired as chairperson JIC, Joint Intelligence Committee. He was special assistant to the Prime Minister, and he was a member of National Commission for Minorities, member of Commonwealth Observers Team for Zimbabwe elections, and as a writer, K.K. has more of socio-political concern, say, as compared to spiritual or religious concerns. The impact of his experience as a police officer is prominently visible in his writings also, especially his earlier writings. With K.K. for the first time in the canon, in the canon of Indian English poetry, for the first time, you have a totally different idiom and word. You have curfew there, the words like curfew. The word of curfew enters. You have the lathi blows, acid bombs are there, curfew, and then riots, communal conflicts, all these kind of things. They find a place for the first time in the word of Indian English poetry. His first-hand experience of stark reality of violence, corruption, hunger, disease, and death at times makes him somewhat disillusioned with this country of ours. You know, it seems to him a landscape of meaninglessness, where he can smell violence in the air, and then only the stupid cuckoo sings. Otherwise, what happens is that Gulmohar coughs blood. And in his Gujarat poems, he says, it is no place for lyre and lute. And in the hands of this master craftsperson, such a vision, it gets expression in kind of irony and satirical tone that is also exceptional in Indian English poetry. Encomiums have been showered upon him for his excellent craftsmanship, his caliber in most effectively expressing his poetic ideas into poetic devices, his vast reservoir of strikingly original and thematically integral imagery, similes, and metaphors makes this master imagist a class apart. Memory, myth, history, religion, rituals, all are there, crucial and central to his vision, to his word. He is an intellectual and an erudite writer with synthesis of naturalism and humanism. And then he is there and he is published, accomplished artist, smoothly shifting from metrical verse to free verse, and that too from one variety of free verse to another variety of free verse. His poetry has enriched Indian English poetry at both the thematic and stylistic levels. M. K. Nayak hails him as most substantial Indo-Anglian poet. Suresh Kohli calls him most complex of the modern Indo-English poets of past as well as present, and Nissim Ezekiel, he eulogizes his depth of feeling and originality of insight. Dear friends, his first love was poetry, but his new love is fiction. I hope we are going to have a wonderful interaction with him as he talks about his works, his vision. He talks about poetry, maybe he talks about his novel, and we also have certain readings from his novels and also his poetry. All yours, sir. Let's welcome him here onto the stage with a big round of applause. Thank you. The session is Professor Dhawan. He's the chairperson of Society for Commonwealth Studies also. So first he will be having a kind of introductory about the session, and then we go on. Welcome, sir.
Tell you the title of his talk, which is very imaginative. The title of his talk is Poetry as Muse and Poetry as Weapon. Mr. K.K. Daruwala.
Introduction, one hardly deserved. Thanks. My topic, ladies and gentlemen, is poetry as music, poetry as a weapon. As action, good God, as weapon. Well, we all know about music. There is sweet music here that softer falls than petals from blown roses on the grass, or night dews on still waters between walls of shadowy granite in a gleaming pass. Music that gentlier on the spirit lies, like tired eyelids upon tired eyes. Music that brings sweet sleep down from the blissful skies. And incidentally, the tired is not T-I-R-E-D, it is T-I-R''D, so that it's just one syllable. In those days, in the 19th century, they bothered about their syllables and they should be exact. The title of my short paper is deliberately misleading. The reference to music is to the aesthetic side of our lives, the aesthetic side of our imagination. See what the 19th century poets did, the one on whose leavings we have been brought up, especially in India. And they wrote of imaginative scenarios like the Kubla Khan or the Ancient Mariner or nightingales and Grecian urns and truth and beauty and skylarks and all the rest, and clouds. And Wordsworth, of course, wrote on his downs from the Great Lakes and romanticized the French Revolution. My professor Professor S.S. Chavla, who had returned from Oxford, he used to always quote Wordsworth. It was bliss on that dawn to be alive, but to, no, I've forgotten it. It was young to be alive, but to live was very heaven. Gender bias was evident amongst the Attic writers and minstrels who invented those stories, because the 19th centurions pilfered stories from, Atlanta and the race, or the goddesses having a race, and the one who lost became spiteful. So there was a gender bias in what he wrote, or what they wrote, and the patriarchal age had completely dawned. Ishtar and Isis and Hatshepsut, the Egyptian goddess, had been sidelined. But I was saying that mythologies are all novels, and the stories by storytellers who never owned a copyright. We of the 20th century went for ugliness. I'm talking of the West and Western literature and the arts. Music copied telegraph and its syncopated rhythms. Speed was in vogue. The art world itself went for a spin from which it has not recovered and may never recover. They went for disfigurement. Ugliness was in demand. Why did they not ask some of us, to sit for a portrait? One could have made some money. You know what Picasso said? He said that at the age of 9, I could paint like Raphael, imagine, because Raphael copied beauty. We, arrogant fellow, we have never said anything like this, that we could write like Sarojini Naidu, even when we were 13. You're supposed to laugh at jokes. The trouble with poetry is that it is about everything. It is about feelings, emotions, life, art, music, the bulbul and the nightingale, not forgetting eagles and ravens and hawks. The cosmos, of course, sun and moon and Venus, and why not throw in Saturn, Shani, Maharaj? You can't leave him out. My favorite constellation, of course, is Orion, because it drifts through the night across the sky. But I forgot to mention life. Poetry is about life, or literature is. There can't be any painting or the arts or anything without life. There is nothing on the Mars or the moon or on Jupiter. And of course, there is reality around us. That too is a big part of our lives. Of course, reality and life are, in a way, mysteries, if you want to consider them that way. And poets and prophets have written about them. Incidentally, I came across a nugget from George Carrera Andrade. He was born in 1902. He's a famous Spanish poet, Ecuadorian, who says in a poem called Nothing is Ours. Nice title. Also a fine philosophy, if you ask me. Nothing is really ours. He says, nobody knows why the birds exist, nor your cask of wine, or the full moon, nor the poppy which burns itself alive, nor the woman of the harp, happy prisoners. So life and its mysteries remain. He wrote for the downtrodden also, happiness is a sea we have never seen, he said. That is pretty dismal and pessimistic, but that's what he said. Poetry needs to go with the poor, Walt Whitman said in his poem to the poor. I have my place among you, he is addressing the poor. Is it nothing that I have preferred to be poor rather than to be rich? The road to riches is easily open to me, but I do not choose it. I choose to stay with you. That's what he said to the poor. So far, so good, but the tougher issues are coming by. There's that guy called Death, and Edwin Brock, a policeman like me, has a very famous and anthologized poem called 5 Ways to Kill a Man. I read him about 30 or 40 years ago in the series of European poets. He is an Englishman, of course. And the poem is called 5 Ways to Kill a Man. I think there are 5 stanzas. I'll quote only one, or 1.5. There are many cumbersome ways to kill a man. You can make him carry a plank of wood to the top of a hill and nail him to it. He's obviously talking about Jesus Christ. To do this properly, you require a crowd of people wearing sandals, a cock that crows, a cloak to dissect, a sponge, some vinegar, and one man to hammer the nails home. Oops. What fell, I don't know. Sorry. I'm so sorry. The second stanza talks of Hitler's gas chambers. You may, if the wind allows, blow gas at him, and it goes on. But the last short stanza brings in the coup de grace. Simpler, I'm quoting him, simpler, direct, and much more neat is to say that he is somewhere living in the middle of the 20th century and leave him there. The best way to kill a man, because the 20th century was one of our, possibly the bloodiest. 2 great wars, the atomic bombs, and what else, and the gas chambers, 6 million. World poetry is an ocean, and much of it is political. I'm slowly driving to the point where the poetry as a weapon is talked about. As much of it is political, tied to insurgent movements, people like the Kurds or the Palestinians asking for their political rights. One could have a fascinating paper on the poetry of Yehuda Amichai and Mahmoud Darwish, both on opposite sides, and yet find poets who can chuck the garb of nationalism when they need to. I had the good opportunity of reading once with Mahmoud Darwish in Struga. He is the great, he was the great, he has passed away tragically, he is the big Palestinian poet. And the fellahin and the aristocrat and the sheikh will all recite Mahmud Darwish. So he was a people's poet. In the middle of the century, translated by Asya Gutman, the poem by Amichai, the big Israeli poet who's also no more, starts with the line, "In the middle of this century, we turned to each other." He's talking about the Palestinian, though it is never mentioned, but obviously it is. And I'm quoting him, that is the last stanza of the poem. "We shall never find peace. Then the nameless one and Amichai meet. Dust from the desert covered the table at which we did not eat. But with my finger I wrote on it the letters of your name." So he's showing the distance. He's not meeting the Palestinian. They are meeting on the table. They could have eaten, but they haven't. And that is how it is. I mean, you can't leave integrity behind when you are writing a poem. I mean, if he had said, he had talked about a table and we are dining together, it would have been false and fake. But this is small potatoes when he is just scribbling on the sand the name of the Palestinian writer or the Palestinian whom he meets. He never clarifies this in the poem. For people, so this is small potatoes for a people whose land has been taken away by force. Mahmud Darwish, the Palestinian, and the voice of his people needs to be addressed. His selected poems entitled, "Unfortunately, It Was Paradise." Palestine was, well, it was never a paradise, but a poet can be afforded that much of license. Translated admirably by Munir Akash and Caroline Forsch. Caroline Forsch was present in Struga in 2007 when I went there. And she is a very big American writer for human rights, and she has written some very striking poems. She was also down, I'm sorry to say, with cancer at that time. I hope she has recovered. And the book starts with, what do you call, an epigraph by no less than Federico Garcia Lorca. And what he says in Spanish, but I'm quoting Lorca now, "But now I am no longer I, nor is my house any longer my house." I was in Cyprus to attend a conference in end November and early December, and the main poet, Stephanos Stephanides, the very famous Cypriot poet, he took me and 3 or 4 others in his car to the Turkish side of Cyprus. And he showed me his house, where he was born, where he lived. Of course, now it is all in the Turkish part, and he doesn't own it. So his tragic fate that his house and his lands have been taken away by force or by circumstances, if I may say so, was very evident. Darwish says in a poem, another road in the road. Possibly he has taken it from Frost, I'm not certain. Darwish says in a poem, another road in the road, quote, there is yet another road in the road, another chance for migration to cross over. We will throw many roses in the river. The poem starts with the rose in Galilee. And at the end of the poem he says, I am from here, which means Palestine, because his village and another 400 villages were taken away by the Israeli army in, I suppose, in 1967, unless it is in 1948 itself. And at the end of the poem he says, I am from here, I am from there, yet am neither here nor there. I will have to throw many roses before I reach a rose in Galilee. He also says in another poem, I love land not trod over by songs of migration or become subject to passions of blood and desire. The passions of blood and desire, I don't know about desire. We are also facing this in the subcontinent, the passions of blood. If we go into the history of the last 70 years, we find that the world was busy initially in clearing the vestiges of colonization and the brutality that went with it. I mean, it's only now that we look back at colonialism and we found that the colonials did nothing for us, not a vestige. I mean, socially, I think the only thing worthwhile they did was to banning sati and a few other things, but otherwise they did nothing for the country. And the British were better colonialists than, say, the Belgians or and Congo, or the French or the Germans. But with time and provocations through terrorism, the state has acquired powers that are astounding. The state has now become the colonizer of the nation. The nation has become the colony of the state. I would like to repeat that and let that message go across. The state has now become the colonizer of the country. The nation has become the colony of the state. If this happens, as it has in Turkey or in Pakistan, where the state has taken over the nation, I'm very sorry, I'll repeat that. The nation has become the colony, that is over. The nation has become the colony of the state. If this happens, as it has in Turkey or Pakistan, where the state has taken over the nation and the ISI and the army have taken over the state, poetry has a duty to perform. If ideology is being driven down your throat, institutions are being tampered with and subjugated, and a posture of aggression is supposed to be the hallmark of heroism, we are in a bad way. And let us not forget that Hitler's Nazis harkened back philosophically to nationalism. This phenomena, the power of the state, needs the attention of literature and especially of poetry, because poetry is more contemporaneous and shorter and has a road straight to the heart that it has a duty to perform. This phenomenon, the power of the state, needs the attention of poetry. Poetry has become in many regions a repository of people's movements, and all over South America. I was at the International Poetry Festival in Medellin, where Escobar had ruled. Escobar had ruled for 20 years. He used to unload 16 tons of drugs on the Florida coast every single day. Can you believe it? And he had, by the time he had been finished off, he had even hired submarines to carry the drugs into United States. And about 2 lakh people in a small country like Colombia had died over the last 10 years or 15 years, and the Poetry Festival had come up as an opponent of the state. I was also invited to Nicaragua for their festival, Poetry Festival, but they kept saying that the government will not allow it. And finally, the government did not allow the festival. Otherwise, February 10th, we were supposed to be at Nicaragua. So, right from South America to the Kurds, to the Baloch in Pakistan, insurgent poetry, protest poetry is thriving. This phenomena, the power of the state, needs the attention of poetry. Poetry has become in many regions a repository of people's movements. Its functions have increased. Ecology has become a favorite subject for poetry to tackle, but equally necessary is for poetry to make people sensible to the rise of the powers of the state and the damage it can do. Poetry as music remains with us permanently, but if circumstances warrant, poetry can also arouse the sensibilities of the people. Thank you.
You also talked about his own poetry, K. Kedarwal's own poetry, because he has been talking about romantics, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and then Whitman, and then Darvish, but he didn't talk much about, or you see that out from his own poetry, but that you did. Thank you so much, sir. You see, this is the beauty of it, interacting with these masters who are right here, the living legend with us. It is an experience in itself. And now I open this session for further interaction. Any of us who feels like asking anything or even expressing opinion and sharing his or her opinion about what he has spoken here, what he has talked about, you're most welcome. Yes.
And it always had, and it still has that power of being a weapon. But where do you find poetry standing in the times, in the current times, when media,
The relevance of poetry today.
when media has become a challenge to poetry in particular and perhaps to all literary genres? Where do you find poetry standing as a weapon in a world ridden by media or social media, so to say?
Poetry in the time.
Is that you hum it to yourself. You see, कौन जीता है तेरी जुल्फ के सर होने तक, क्या माना कि तगाफुल न करोगे तुम पर खाक हो जाएंगे हम तुमको खबर होने तक. You will say to yourself, you see. So poetry is also a dialogue with yourself, where the social media does not come in. But when you are talking about poetry as weapon, there are many aspects. For example, take that Pakistani poet Abu Jalib. He used to write during Ziaul Haq's time, and you know, when the military, and that well-known, notorious line, Pakistan which Mauja Mauja, Sare Paase, Fauja, you know, there it was. I still remember another ghazal. अगर मैं फिरंगी का दरबान होता तो जीना किस कदर आसान होता. मेरे बच्चे भी अमेरिका पढ़ते, हर गर्मी में मैं इंग्लिस्तान होता. मेरी इंग्लिश बला की चुस्ती होती, बला से जो ना उर्दू दां होता. हर सूबे में मेरी ज़मीनें होती, वल्लाह मैं सदर पाकिस्तान होता. You see, that is how you can satirize as well. I remember the Irish poet, but he has a very difficult name. So I can't recite that. I can't tell you his name. But my father left me a book of Irish poetry published in 1933, where he said, those were the days when Ireland was still under the British, you know. We have no ships to send the Negroes, Yeats. In those days, they still called people Negroes. We have no ships to send the Negroes, Yeats. We have no ships to send to outer races, to sport with them and Gaelicize their faces, to talk of Paul Henry in the no Paul Henry places. The world has known us beggars at the gates, with made in England on our very faces. And I think the last line was, what are we but a dresser full of plates? So there is anguish, there is agony, I just came out, very egoistic. Rakshanda Jalil has just come out with a book on the Great War, which means the First War, 1915. And she has translated Urdu and Hindi poets in English. And I was a little surprised. All the Urdu, all the Hindi poets were attacking England for using the Indian army as mercenaries. And all the attacks were direct and very forceful, while we lost 60,000 people in the First Great War. I think their names are on the India Gate. They may not be in the National Emporium which has been put up, but they are certainly there on the India Gate. I lost a cousin in Italy during the Second War. He was much older than me, and the brightest person in the family. I hope I have answered your question to an extent. The social media is the social media. A lot of the social media is governed by sub-mediocre people who spout out what they want. Poetry is done or is written by people with a lot of feeling, a lot of emotion, and a lot of depth as well.
Sir, does poetry really mean something in a time when nationalists are preaching and they wear and they are crying themselves hoarse over so-called nationalism nowadays? And doesn't it make you feel despondent and remember Autumn when he says that poetry makes nothing happen? It lives in the way of saying, a style. So I was really wondering whether the silent way of poetry are really relevant in contemporary times when such violence and such bloodshed is preached everywhere. Thank you.
Literature or painting, and it yet can be matched. I mean, if you have heard of and seen Picasso's Guernica, where he has brought out all the violence of the Second Great War and all that had happened in Spain by Hitler and Franco and all the rest. Nehru had also talked about the Spanish War, and so, I mean, there can't be equivalence between art and life. They have to be seen as different, what shall I say, different entities. And you can never measure the amount of violence in a poem or or on the street. What is happening in South America, people being killed, and what is happening in Syria, what the ISIS did, and they had taken the acronym from the goddess Isis, who was supposed to be the goddess of healing and the goddess of the arts. Very ironic. And I think one of the planes which dropped the atomic bombs was called the Laughing Buddha by the Americans. Not Hiroshima, Enola Gay, that was the Enola Gay, that was the plane. But I think the first bomb was thrown in the American desert, and it was called, or when it was manufactured, it was called the Laughing Buddha. That can be that ironic, and I don't think the word ironic should be used. It is tragically and bloodily ironic. So I don't look for equivalence between the two, if I may say so.
For the benefit of others, they can't hear what I'm saying. What I think the young generation, which I think is quite relevant now. See, there used to be a poem we used to teach at Delhi University called The Siege of Lucknow by Alfred Tennyson. So that told us, and from what the research we did on it was that people in England came to know about the, let's say, the horrors of that 1857, whatever we call it, War of Independence, Revolt, etc. So poetry was in a way conveying, gave you, in an era in which news didn't travel so quickly, poetry played that role. Milton's Paradise Lost, to justify the ways of God to men, also showed you ambiguities. What I think he meant is very relevant, that in this age of social media, does poetry reinvent itself? Wordsworth, the glory of the French Revolution, you brought out so well. So what as you're such a seasoned poet, you've also written on the Persian Empire and so many things. Does a poet have a new role, or does he just go into aesthetic glory? I think that is what he really meant. As I said, Tennyson's that Siege of Lucknow, when we were teaching, we showed that it created the British audience were sort of astonished that so many things did happen. They didn't know what it was. Now you got to know things immediately. So where does poetry go from now? That is what we'd like your views.
May I
If in Hitler's times, and they were very powerful, and they had an effect on the people who viewed the plays. So I don't think that poetry will be subjected to the background. poetry has been subjected and marginalized by people who hog the mic, who hog the TV time. How is it that 500 channels and 200 channels don't have a half an hour on writing, on a one-act play, on a chapter from a novel or a short story? Why is it not there? It is just not there because they are market-driven. By market-driven does not always mean money. Market-driven for the media is the attention, the TRPs, etc. they get from what they are broadcasting or telecasting. I hope that's my view.
Yeah, I just wanted to interject one thing, media, to spread your poetry.
Yeah.
In that way, it is a weapon and it can be more powerful by the use of the social media. That is what I wanted to contribute.
So that was a very enriching session indeed. And I think more than poetry should be music, everybody is now moving into that direction where poetry has to be more of a protest. It is already becoming more of a protest. And actually so much of Dalit writing, if we read that, then that violent kind of idiom is also there. Dalit writing, Negro writing, even poetry, they have matching. The matching idiom is there. So much violence is there against them, and even in their writing, poetry. So much violence of idiom is there if you read the Dalit poets and all that, and they have already made it as an instrument. Then poetry becomes an instrument to bring that kind of angry change. Meena Kandasamy is one of the poets. Meena Kandasamy, she is the first Dalit poet writing in English. And we look at the diction and the idiom, then it's just like that. Revolution is on fire, everything is on fire. The girl is on fire, the poetry is on fire, and the different kind of poetry is there. So thank you so much. That was a very enriching session and very meaningful interaction also. And at the end of it all, this hour-long session, I really feel so much rewarded sitting here because finer, sensibility and finer sensitivity, even this 1 hour can bring. Thank you so much. Mr. Jagdish Batra, will we conclude the session here? Yes. Okay. So now the lunch. The hunger is not the philosophical hunger, yes of course. The physical hunger and that too.
And not without a
Yes. Very good. Thank you so much. 1:15 is the time for the next session. Exactly.